We are live, ladies and gentlemen, after the 27-11 UCLA loss. We're going to wait to get some people in here. And as we always do, we're going to read the Bet Online advertisement, guys. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance to win weekly prizes and a share of $200K. When the game's over, head over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet Online. The game starts here. Well, man, we got enough people in the chat already. We're going to start this thing off, man. 27-11. And this was an impressive game for UCLA. I think a lot of different fronts. We're making progress is where I determine as impressive. You look at what Justin Martin came in and did for his first game of collegiate football in that environment. I think it says a lot to his character and his preparation. I mean, you look at just the raw numbers, 22 of 30, highest completion percentage we've had as a quarterback, this entire year. Turnover-free football, a touchdown as well. Loved what we saw from our guy there. And I think one of the biggest adjustments to that, man, Wayne kind of alluded to it on our last show. He was kind of in on the loop. Sam Union at center. It moved Carlin back to his natural position of right guard, where Carlin's finally playing at his strengths. We've got a natural center in there in Yoon. And we truly have our 5 best linemen out there. Prongos, who many of us didn't think was going to be a starting caliber player this year, is looking like one of our best linemen. DeGiorgio's back there, and Holstage is just the guard that we knew him to be. And one play kind of summarized this more than others. On that 2-point conversion, the little flip toss, Keegan Jones, the line was pulling in a way we just have not seen this year. A very fun final drive for UCLA to kind of add some points and momentum. Our first touchdown since the LSU game. Give me your interpretation of Justin Martin's debut for Bruins fans, because I came away, even in a losing scenario, very, very impressed on what he was able to bring to the table.
No, very impressed, Will. And, let's look at this sort of contextually. This is a first career start at Happy Valley. This is arguably the hardest first career start you could possibly have in all of college football. And I thought Justin Martin did a phenomenal job. And I think one of the concerns, Will, that we had with Martin, kind of watching him over the course of the spring and the fall, is sometimes, maybe the pace of his reads wasn't maybe as quick as needed for sort of Power 5 college football. Sometimes he'd lock on a single receiver. And so we were really looking for sort of that progression element. And I thought, Will, his poise was absolutely terrific. His ability to kind of stay in the pocket, know the rush was coming, and find his outlet receivers was absolutely terrific, particularly on those first 2 drives. And I think this has to sort of go hand in hand, Will, with Eric Bieniemy. I think Eric Bieniemy called his best game of the season by far. And I think it was one of the things that we were really looking for. What have we been really clamoring for the last couple of weeks is short throws. Let's go 1 read, 2 read, and balls out. Or you take off and run. And that's exactly what we saw over the course of this game, Will. I loved what I saw from those first 2 drives in particular, where Martin was just so decisive with the ball, particularly on 3rd and 4th down situations. There was the 2 third down conversions to Logan Loya on those first 2 drives. There was that 4th down conversion to Matavao, and then he had another 4th down conversion to Loya on that final drive of the game that set up the 1st and goal before that final touchdown. So I think Martin did a terrific job, in having the poise to let his outlet receivers sort of get out in the flat, but then B, the call of Eric Bieniemy to sort of keep everything quick, short, 1 read and go. And I thought that was absolutely terrific. And I think a third element, Will, that we saw from Martin was kind of the arm angles, even to get the ball out. There were a couple of those sidearm throws that he was able to make just to get the ball out in the flat that I thought was terrific. And we're finally utilizing the offensive weapons that we should. Welcome back, Logan Loya, and the leading receiver on last year's team. We were obviously wondering what is really going on here. Hopefully this now catapults Logan Loya to, again, position himself to be the leading receiver on this team moving forward, because I think that's where it needs to go. and then also with Matavao as a receiving tight end underneath. And then I thought TJ Harden did a phenomenal job as a receiver as well, particularly on that beautiful 53-yard wheel route where, again, Martin was able to sort of extend the pocket, with his drop back and find that ball before he got hit. So I thought Martin did a great job, but I think it went hand in hand, Will, with Eric Bieniemy's play calling. You saw very few, if any, 5-step drops, 7-step drops. Ball was out really quick, and that was the biggest difference in this game for me in terms of how we're feeling about this team moving forward going into next week.
Yeah, man. And it just the execution was just so much more crisp out there. That's the word I would use. We were talking right before we went live on the show. You take away the couple sacks that Justin Martin had in college football, the rushing yards actually get negatively affected by sacks. That Justin Martin had 7 carries, technically 7 carries for negative 9 yards. If you decrease that, you subtract that number. This is the first game we've run for over 100 yards. Berger showed flashes. Keegan Jones had that 22-yard scamper. Keegan, TJ Harden, these are guys that just came out to play today. It was a lot of fun to watch those. And you made the point, man. It's not rocket science putting the ball in your playmakers' hands. Logan Loya has been a stud at UCLA for a long time. It's about time we started feeding him the ball. Had that touchdown at the end in the red zone, 6 catches, 57 yards. Made some really big catches. And, the one in the first half, it was 3rd and 10, and they hit Loya over the middle for his longest gain of the day of 18 yards. I thought that was just awesome to see him back in the fold because it's not like this guy can't play. It's one thing if you haven't proven yourself time and time again. Logan Loya, was our biggest playmaker in the receiving room last year statistically, and it just felt like a wasted opportunity for him these first 4 weeks of football with him not really being in the mix outside that LSU first half. So keep feeding the ball to Logan Loya. Keep feeding the ball to Jalen Berger. Martin was very impressive. I do think the line made a difference. Even that half a second, full second right there really helped him out in terms of processing. I thought it was very impressive what he did. But would you be leaning towards a situation where Garbers is healthy going into Minnesota? You got Justin Martin, who looked really good against a top 5 defense in the country right here against Penn State. What would be your thoughts moving forward if Martin or Garbers is going to be sent back out there?
It's interesting, Will. It's a really interesting conversation because I want to double click a little bit on the offensive line before answering that question because they deserve their flowers. They deserve their props. And you said it really well, Will. It felt like they were holding, their blocks for that extra half a second longer that allowed the quick balls to be out. But a couple of stats here, Will, for you. You could argue that Penn State has the best front in the country, or it's probably inarguable that it's sort of top 5. It's one of the 5 best defensive fronts in the country. For this offensive line to only allow 2 sacks, Will, over the course of the game for arguably the best, if not one of the best defensive fronts in the country was absolutely significant. And you mentioned, Will, the sack yards with Martin. But even if you add the sack yards and incorporate that in the game, UCLA outrushed Penn State today. 93-85, given that offensive line. And you had 3 running backs, Will, to your point, that went north of 25 yards rushing with Harden, with Berger, and then with Keegan Jones as well. And Keegan Jones and Berger in particular, Will, Keegan went 7.6 yards per carry, Berger 4.2. So it wasn't even just sort of attrition necessarily. Guys were finding some holes. So really incredible offensive line play. I thought Bieniemy's play calling along with this revised offensive line were 2 of the 3 real key elements of the game. And I know we'll get to the third here shortly down the line. We got another guy to give his flowers to that we'll get to. I think, Will, it's really interesting because it's not quite apples to apples. I think Martin was absolutely phenomenal, but we haven't seen Garbers be the beneficiary of this line. Right, with this adjustment, right? And we haven't seen Garbers be the beneficiary of this play calling from Eric Bieniemy. Eric Bieniemy called a wildly different game today than he has over the course of the season. So I think it's unfair to say J-Mart or Garbers because it's not quite apples to apples. Both circumstances are different. Will, I would expect both quarterbacks to play next week against Minnesota. And I think that was going to be a game where you sort of decide after that game who's going to be your quarterback moving forward. I think Martin has done enough where you want to sort of put him out there a little bit. I could see a world here where both guys get a run next week against Minnesota, and then you determine, because think about this, Will. You get Minnesota next week, and then you got the bye. And so, it's almost like a second season begins that final 6. So I think we see a world where both guys get a little bit of run next week, where it's all kind of equal. And then there could be a decision on our hands in that bye week. And then you just ride with one horse the final 6 games of the season.
That would be insane if you're doing the Drew Henson, Tom Brady formula there, where one plays the first half, other plays the second. We roll with it from there. Deshaun Foster is playing his cards close to his vest. It was the pregame. Ben Bolch actually got the question in first. He said it's Garber's team. He's going to have to go back and watch the film, but he expects Garbers to start. You have no advantages of revealing what you're going to do this early in the process, so who knows? But boy, if they're trotting out 2 quarterbacks there next Saturday, we may officially have a quarterback competition in Westwood with Justin Martin. And I'll be honest, he earned it, man. Like you mentioned, intimidating front, offensive line plays better, but just no turnovers. I mean, that's you move the football. I was incredibly impressed with the poise of Justin Martin in his first collegiate start at Happy Valley in, that environment. Just unbelievable stuff.
Will, and just the last point there I'll make is this is Garbers' team. There's no question. And Garbers, I think, has a stronger arm. Like there's a better fastball there, you can tell. But there's 2 things that Martin brought today that's interesting that you want to sort of see the apples to apples. The one is those arm angles that we talked about. That ability, because he's more of an over-the-shoulder type of thrower, he can go sort of sidearm and change the arm angles. Garbers is sort of a sidearm quarterback. His release is sort of more 3/4 by nature, so there aren't a ton of arm angles. And then, Will, the other element that I think was a little bit more subtle, but Martin, on some of those quarterback keepers just looks a little bit more fluid than Garbers, and so that's how you sort of manufacture some running ability as well on those read options. And I thought Gus Johnson, it was sort of a unique comparison. I mean, far away, but those long strides, that long look, it is a little Vince Youngish. He does look like that with the ball a little bit. So I think just that athleticism of being able to get out of the pocket along with those arm angles, I don't think you can just quite dismiss what you saw today. I think there is a conversation that needs to be had about the quarterback.
That'll be very intriguing. I think right now I would lean to just seeing Garbers with the line.
Sure.
But let's say, the line is protecting next week and Garbers reverts back to kind of how he's been playing this year. And he's got the time. He's got the run game. I think you got to go back to Martin at that point. So it's going to be a situation we're going to be closely monitoring for UCLA moving forward, guys. I thought you mentioned it earlier, man. The defense played really well. Kaika Malloy had that wonderful press conference where if you were ever questioning his commitment to UCLA football this week, it kind of showed in spades, tearing up. He wants to be the best for these kids. And, from a run defense perspective, you got to remember this was a top 5 offense rolling into this game as well. Andy Kotelnicki, very gifted offensive coordinator. If you could get the ball moving at Kansas as an offensive coordinator, you could do it at just about any school. And the run game, man, they were under 3 yards a carry, 30 carries for 85 yards. We didn't get to see Nick Singleton, but Katron Allen, he did his work, 21 carries, 78 yards, and a touchdown. But he had to earn every one of those. His longest run of the day was 11 yards long. And we could talk about Femi. We could talk about Carson Schweschinger, who had 15 total tackles. He's been a standout in a loaded linebacking room, as we've talked about. But the guy to me that stood out the most for disrupting this run game, Toia was a monster in the trenches today. Jay Toia opening those gaps for those linebackers to come in and make plays for those short gains, really keeping this Penn State offense on its toes. The stats will never show it. He only had 2 tackles. But what he did in terms of empowering his teammates to step up and make plays was phenomenal. Where do you want to start on the defensive side of the ball, and who do you want to talk about first?
No, Will, I think you said it best, and I think it's kind of that two-headed monster. I think you saw why over the course of this season and even in the offseason when that flirtation existed with Toia going to Texas, how distraught you and I were, where we said, this guy is the most valuable player on this team. He's the most irreplaceable player on this team because even against an elite offensive line in Penn State, he was an absolute disruptor, needed double teams. You could see that they were bringing Warren on his side to even sort of help there. I mean, he was attracting 2.5 bodies on every play, Will, and that's what enabled Schwessinger and others to come through and make a ton of tackles. And I think along with Toia, I think the big unlock today was Femi at the edge. And I think solidifying Femi at the edge, we're not going to be messing around anymore with middle linebacker. This is going to be our defensive end moving forward, I think was significant. 10 total tackles, 5 solo tackles. He had the sack. We had a sack, Will, after 4 games.
I know.
He got the sack and then 2 tackles for loss. And I thought his ability, Will, to continuously kind of set the edge and force Allen to kind of go inside into Toia, where there were more bodies, I think was absolutely significant. So that dynamic duo now is giving this front 7 life here, Will. And I think when you look at Oladipo's body, he's so sort of upper body heavy, straight line burst, such upper body strength. And then, he has that sort of athleticism. I think that it just lends itself more to being a defensive end than even a linebacker. He doesn't have to worry about like running 10, 12, 14 yards. His game is within, a 4 to 5 yard radius where he can just burst and be this explosive athlete that he is. And I thought he was absolutely terrific. So Ikaika Malloy, what a week it's been for him. How engaging, how empathetic he was over the course of his press conference, and what terrific adjustments, Will, because that's been the 3 main adjustments we saw. It was Bieniemy's play calling, the change to Yoon at the offensive line, moving Carlin back to right guard, to your point, and solidifying Femi as the edge, no question about it. I think those were the 3 huge changes strategically that we saw, which is why a 28.5-point underdog, Will, was scoreless at the end of one. Look, this was a 7-3 game, Will, with about 3 minutes left, 2.5 minutes left. It really was that kind of 3rd and 11 that Aller had that second level throw right before the end of the half. Otherwise, there was a world here where this thing was 7-3 going into halftime with UCLA getting the ball at the start of the second half. So they did a terrific job. Obviously, they wore down in the second half, just didn't quite have the same number of horses. But to only lose by 16, out rushing, the total yards was only about 320 to 266, Will. UCLA had more time of possession, 33 minutes to 27, and to only lose by 16 after being a 28.5-point underdog. Lots to be excited about here, Will, especially now that you're on the other side of this. This is 4 consecutive ranked opponents, and the fact that they're 1-4, but we're feeling good moving forward is I think what is so significant, because now you have an opportunity with these 7 games left. There's some winnable games there. Nothing's going to be easy, but Minnesota, Iowa, Fresno State, Rutgers. I mean, there's some games here that you can stay in, that you can potentially win to try and threaten bowl eligibility here. So I think there's a lot to be excited about, but it started defensively, Will, back to the point. Toia, Oladipo, that this dynamic duo, and now you got Medrano as the linebacker. These are the 3 best defensive players on this team far and away, and now they're finally all in the right position to be able to exemplify their skills.
Yeah, Femi is just a physical freak. We've talked about it for so long. 6'3", 250 listed. Sometimes it feels like he's even bigger than that.
Yep.
And just the way his body can move and bend at that size. We thought it was a no-brainer for a long time. Like, maybe explore this guy at the edge. Bustich ruled out for this game, so Femi kind of gets his crack at it. And he's generated the best pass rush we've had all season long. So I think you got to keep him at the edge right now. And that's not only just a position he can succeed at right now. I think if he continues to play at this level, I mean, that was a Penn State offensive lineman he beat for that sack. Very, very good offensive line unit for Penn State. Traditionally, scouts are watching this game going, hey, like, we can use you at the edge in the future, man. So that is a big plus for Femi to be able to play the edge. I think we got to explore options of him doing that. And, dude, we had 2 4th down conversions in the red zone that didn't go right. It was a 2-possession game at the end of the game. Imagine if we convert those and punch it in. We're looking at a game that's coming down to the wire at that point. So there's a lot to look forward to on that front.
And Will, the other thing I'll say is, look, and you never want to sort of go there, but Joel Klatt mentioned it. I'm so happy that he did, and he was so fair in his analysis and over the course of the telecast. There were a couple of bogus calls in this game, especially in that third quarter, when it was still 14-3, and that interception by Aller in the end zone, there was not a hole there at all. I mean, I thought Addison did a nice job of jamming. And then, it was sort of step for step at that point. And then when you saw it sort of on the other side, when Berger got just egregiously held and that wasn't called, I mean, just think, Will, if that interception even takes place. You're still 14-3 with about 8 minutes to go in the third with the ball. You're still sort of in it, at that point. So, the officials didn't do the Bruins any favors on that particular play. But this was a very competitive game. And I think Penn State fans, you could see the energy in the building at the end of that game. They walked out of that stadium nervous about their team because UCLA availed themselves so well.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at what Drew Allard did, who I admittedly higher on than you and Wayne were, but he was 17-24, 237 yards. You take away his biggest completion today, which was nearly 60 yards to Liam Clifford. You're looking at a guy that was pretty contained for the most part, like 160, 170 yards passing. So you got to give credit to the secondary group and Cody Whitfield and what they were able to do in terms of limiting the downfield passing, limiting the run game. This was Malloy's, masterclass so far this year. I thought he did a hell of a job, and it really showed with that front. So I'm going to pose you a question. You mentioned the three kind of things that really helped UCLA, really get over the hump this week and really put themselves in the ball game. The offensive line improving, Bieniemy's play calling, Femi at the edge. 1 through 3 rank which one was the biggest for UCLA in terms of them, putting together a performance that we can at least hang our hat on and say we tried hard on.
Yeah, I mean, that's tough, Will, because they're all three are so great.
Yeah.
I think number one is actually the ability to set the edge. I think the fact that they were actually able to kind of get some edge presence defensively and not be able to wear down, I think that was really critical. And then I think number two, obviously the offensive line was so critical. We were sort of talking about it. I'll go offensive line 2 there, and then Bieniemy's play calling 3. Although I will say, Will, Bieniemy sort of calling a different game was also really significant. So really hard for me there. You could argue offensive line 1, Bieniemy 2, Femi at the edge 3. You could do it any number of ways because it was so much at the margin. But for me, I think I'm just going to go. I know the offensive line has been so maligned, but I think a lot of what we saw, even in the second half of the LSU game, even at times, even with Indiana, we've fallen behind early just because of our inability to set the edge, and there's no pressure on third down. And then that puts you behind the 8 ball offensively. Teams blitz more, and because your offensive line is poor, you're more susceptible to sacks. So there's like a domino effect. So as a result of that, it may be a bit of a curve, but I'm going to say the ability to set the edge 1, the offensive line adjustments 2, and then Bieniemy's play calling 3.
I think that's a great response. I'm going to flip it. I'm going to say the offensive line.
Sure. Totally fair.
Bieniemy from a play calling standpoint, you could call whatever play you want, but if your quarterback's getting no time back there, you can't do anything, right? It looks better when you're making plays, but it's also like, hey, my quarterback actually had some semblance of time in the backfield. So offensive line, they were rushing the ball as effectively as it was looked all year. Offensive line deserves all the credit. Carlin is a good right guard, man. He just playing that center position. We talked about it. It's like turning your Pat Ewins into a freaking 3-point shooter. You just can't do it. It's just part of the game. Setting the edge is very close number 2. I mean, it's a very respectable answer. Richard Sherman had this point as a corner himself. He goes, the best way to be a good corner is to have an elite defensive line.
Right.
You don't have to do much back there. If your D-line is getting pressure on them, it forces ill-advised throws from the quarterback. Totally. You can see at least in the back of Aller's head, he had to be thinking about that pass rush, which is something quarterbacks haven't done. I mean, Wayne had that joke where he's like, the quarterback last week, he had a clean jersey. Like Dylan Gabriel could have, worn the same jersey this week without doing any laundry. So just having that threat was so critical to UCLA on so many different facets. And then Bieniemy with the play calling. Do I think it was improved? I would say yes, because it was against a superior team. But in order to be a good play caller, you got to have all the cogs, the keys in the cogs for you offensively. So I think his play calling has been relatively the same as what we've seen. Do I like getting the ball to Loya more? Of course, man. Loya is the type of guy we need to get the ball a lot more of. But, I just think that's kind of the formation and the numbers I've got when it comes down to these guys.
And Will, the one thing I'll say there, just on the defensive side, you alluded to it really well. I thought the defense played so well. Like, Aller had 4 throws in this game, Will. It was 4 throws. I mean, it was the 2 third down throws. He had that deep seam route on third down of their first touchdown drive midway through the second quarter, and then had another one, it was sort of an inside post, again, second level throw. Both NFL quality throws there to Clifford. Then obviously he had the deep ball to Clifford there in the fourth quarter, and then he had that wheel route to Warren. Those were the 4 throws, Will, in my mind, that he made the whole game. And I think if you add up those 4 throws, it came to about 120, 125 yards. He basically had 100 yards the rest of the game. I mean, this defense gave up 4 throws, and you would argue 3 of those throws were NFL caliber throws. And so, you tip your cap and say, hey, that's just a great ball. So the fact that they made Penn State have to earn everything. I mean, even that first drive, Will, 16 plays, 82 yards, 8.5 minutes off the clock. I mean, they even forced third down in the goal-to-goal situation. I mean, they just made Penn State earn everything. So Malloy should really be excited about this. And if they can just bottle this, Will, that's the key. Can they bottle these 3 adjustments and bottle this version of UCLA? Because this version of UCLA, against the likes of a Minnesota, against the likes of an Iowa, against the likes of a Fresno State, against the likes of even at Washington, can do extremely well. And, as far-fetched as this is, I really believe the season begins now, over these next 7. Can you get to 5-2 and get to that elusive bowl eligibility? That would be a massive win for year 1 of the Deshaun Foster era. So I think that's where the mentality has to be. We're out of the woods now. This murderer's row schedule we're in, and we've gotten out of that schedule now, kind of finding some things. We're actually sort of on the upswing of momentum rather than being decimated. And I think that's all we could ask for.
Yeah. And, I came into this game thinking about Penn State. This is a new Penn State look. That's what I thought coming into this game. They finally got the offense right. The defense is usually always in this category, pretty elite defense. But it's the same thing, man. Yeah. Unless if Nick Singleton comes back and is all Big Ten running back, which is plausible.
Sure.
But, they just don't have enough guys that can make plays. This feels like the same Penn State team for the last decade plus under James Franklin. So if I'm, in terms of should UCLA fans or Penn State fans feel better about this game, it's unequivocally UCLA.
UCLA, yes.
Penn State fans have got to be just going, is this the same thing I've been watching for a decade plus? Because Franklin has consistently proven he is pretty good, but he's not great. He's not great. He's just on the outside looking in. And
well, Will, they were. It's such a great point that you made because they were alluding to it. And obviously, we're not a Penn State show, but we'll dabble here for just a minute. 3-15 under Franklin against top 10 competition. Yeah. 6-22, Will, against top 15 competition. Wow. And I think the big element that's missing for Penn State right now is these guys on the outside. Harrison, Evans, they were excited about these 2 guys. Hey, look, you can look good on 50, 60, 70-yard balls against Toledo and Kent State, but against Big Ten competition, where are you? And I think that's going to be the key. If one of those 2 guys doesn't kind of separate and be a real weapon on the outside with this 2-headed monster running back, and then Warren, who's kind of this gadget. It's almost like if Tim Tebow played tight end. That's sort of who Warren is. But if they don't have that threat on the outside, Will, they're just not going to be able to compete with the likes of Ohio State, Oregon, even USC.
Yeah, I completely agree, man. And, I think on that note, we got to sign off, guys, but I really appreciate everyone coming out. We're going to try to do some lives coming forward. The season, as Madman alluded to, starts now. We need to take care of business against Minnesota. If we could just find a way to even sniff bowl eligibility. I, as a UCLA, person that covers the team, you as well, you a fan and alumnus, even getting to 5 wins would be just very encouraging going into year 2 of Deshaun Foster. So, guys, keep the faith. There was much improvement to be had today, and let's hope it continues to move in that trajectory. You guys have a great rest of your weekend. We'll be back later this week. I think we're going to try to get Wayne on again to preview this Minnesota game. He's going to have a lot of positive thoughts about his time at Penn State. But you guys have a great one. We'll talk to you soon. Bruin Bible, we are